All right, picture this. You're walking into somewhere completely unfamiliar. Maybe it's a dense, ancient forest, or a desolate desert canyon, or even just a winding road in the dead of night. You're taking it all in, feeling the crunch of dirt under your boots, and then, out of nowhere, the air just goes completely still. You get that weird, creeping sensation. The hair on the back of your neck stands straight up. Suddenly, you realize something feels terribly, fundamentally wrong with time itself. The ambient noise fades, and reality feels like it's moving through molasses. Well, if you've ever felt that, you've experienced what history calls lost seconds. And in today's Explainer, we're diving deep into this seriously bizarre psychological and biological architecture behind it all.
Now here's the truly unsettling part. It's that jarring disconnect that hits you the second you step back into the normal world. You shake off that weird, eerie feeling, you look up at the sky and you check your wrist. In an instant, what your watch says and what your memory swears just happened, they're in direct, total conflict. You find out that way more or maybe way less time has passed than you genuinely thought. Like, you felt you were walking for 10 minutes max, but the sun is already setting and 3 hours have inexplicably vanished. It is a massive shock to the system when the objective, mechanical ticking of a clock completely contradicts your own internal, subjective experience.
And the thing is, this isn't a new phenomenon. Generational reports of this exact thing have been documented all over the planet for centuries. We hear the stories, right? Experienced hikers out in the Pacific Northwest who wander off the trail in a heavy fog, feeling like they've only been lost for a brief moment, only to be found days later with absolutely zero memory of the interviewing time. These intense accounts beg a massive question. Are these stories actual evidence of something extraordinary? Like, are we talking about a literal tear in the fabric of space-time or a paranormal event? Or do they simply show how the human brain perceives time entirely differently under unusual, highly specific conditions? To figure that out, we actually need to look at how we experience time on a normal, predictable day.
So usually our experience of time feels incredibly constant and reliable. It is the absolute bedrock of our perceived reality. Deep inside our brains, we have this thing called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It acts as our master internal clock, regulating our circadian rhythms and syncing us up perfectly with the rotation of the Earth. 1 second follows another, tick, 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 with absolute precision. 1 minute predictably becomes an hour, and 1 hour smoothly bleeds into the next. I mean, we literally build our entire lives, our rigid schedules, and our whole understanding of the universe on this assumed consistency. We rarely even question it because our internal biology syncs up flawlessly with the digital clocks on our walls. And honestly, that's exactly what makes it so terrifying when that consistency just shatters.
But here is our first major clue. Our objective experience of time actually isn't constant at all. It's incredibly fragile and totally at the mercy of our emotional state and our physical environment. Just think about a moment when you were gripped by intense, sudden fear, maybe a near-miss car accident. In that split second, your amygdala floods your system with adrenaline, forcing your brain to record memories at a much denser rate. Because you're basically processing more frames per second, mere moments stretch out and seconds feel like agonizing minutes. On the flip side, when you're super excited or in a deep creative flow, entire hours can disappear in a flash. Add in profound sensory isolation, that can completely decouple your mind from any standard perception of time passing whatsoever.
And we really have to acknowledge something important here. Witnesses aren't just making this stuff up for attention. This isn't just modern internet fiction. This is a deeply entrenched historical phenomenon. Throughout history, ordinary, highly credible people, from 19th century pioneers keeping meticulous journals to modern-day park rangers, have described incredibly unusual experiences in remote locations. They vividly report completely losing track of time or returning to a familiar base camp after what felt like a short hike, only to find they've literally been gone for an entire day. Even weirder, sometimes they remember the sequence of events entirely differently from the very people they were traveling with. These are genuine, deeply felt human experiences, and they demand a real explanation.
So because these weird experiences are so deeply felt and universally shared across different eras, they naturally gave birth to something bigger. They created the enduring legends we still hear today about specific geographic spots where time supposedly stops, or warps, or just totally misbehaves. Think about the folklore surrounding the Bermuda Triangle, or old Celtic myths about fairy rings, where a mortal might dance for a night but lose 100 years. Or even local legends of haunted valleys where compasses just spin out of control. When enough people experience a profound distortion of time in a specific spot, society naturally attempts to explain the unexplainable by assigning supernatural properties to the land itself, rather than looking at the biology of the traveler.
But hey, before we start mapping out supernatural portals, we absolutely must look at the hard science. There are incredibly well-documented psychological and physiological factors that can entirely rewrite how we perceive our surroundings. First up, intense stress. It has a massive, proven effect on how our memories are encoded, often fracturing them into confusing pieces. Then you have deep physical fatigue. When you're completely exhausted, your brain prioritizes basic survival and motor function over the luxury of timekeeping, which severely distorts your sensory perception. Add in simple navigation errors making journeys seem impossibly frustratingly long, or extreme environmental conditions like heavy fog, blinding snow, or mild hypoxia at high altitudes, and you've basically got the perfect recipe for completely severing your connection to reality.
But there is this absolutely fascinating caveat here that we just cannot ignore. Even when you sit down and present these perfectly logical, heavily researched psychological variables to the people who actually lived through the missing time, they frequently reject them. Witnesses remain completely, stubbornly convinced that something highly unusual and likely paranormal happened to them out there in the woods. And you can kind of see why. The logical explanations just do not match the sheer raw intensity and reality of what they felt in that moment. To the person who lived it, the distortion of time wasn't some minor brain glitch or a bit of fatigue. It was a physical, tangible event that they endured. So, knowing how fiercely convinced these witnesses are, it brings us to the ultimate question. Do we actually need a supernatural explanation? I mean, do we genuinely need ghosts or interdimensional portals or localized gravitational time warps to understand why these stories are so incredibly convincing to those who live them? Or is there a mechanism inside our own heads that is so unimaginably powerful it can perfectly simulate an impossible reality and convince us that it's the absolute truth? Well, it turns out the human brain is an absolute master illusionist. Think about it. When you are stressed, isolated, or lost in an unfamiliar environment, your brain suddenly lacks reliable sensory data. But it doesn't just shut down or show you a blank screen, right? Instead, it actively goes to work filling in those glaring gaps using whatever cognitive tools it has available. By rapidly patching together fragmented sensory inputs, assumptions, and panic, a completely real-feeling experience is constructed right from scratch. Those missing hours of time aren't swallowed by some magic portal in the forest. They are seamlessly papered over by your own mind desperately trying to make sense of a confusing, terrifying situation. It renders a continuous narrative just so you don't completely break down.
To really wrap our heads around how this happens, we need to talk about constructed reality. Look, we all comfortably like to think of our eyes and ears as high-definition video cameras, flawlessly recording a perfect objective timeline of events straight to a hard drive in our skulls. But that is not how human perception works at all. Our perception of reality is a continuous, active generation by the brain. It is constantly rendering the world around you in real time. So when it drops a few frames because of intense fear, exhaustion, or environmental overload, it literally just writes a new script to cover the error. It might borrow from past memories, deep-seated fears, or pure imagination to stitch that timeline back together, presenting it to you as absolute fact.
So where does this leave us? How should we react to these incredible stories going forward? Honestly, we need to find this delicate middle ground between immediate belief and quick dismissal. The next time someone passionately claims they entered a mysterious place where time simply stopped, don't immediately validate the supernatural conclusion they've jumped to. But equally importantly, do not dismiss their genuine experience too quickly either. We have to have empathy for the experiencer. What they went through felt entirely, undeniably real to them. Dismissing it outright totally ignores the incredible, powerful cognitive process that just took place to protect them in a moment of extreme distress.
Ultimately, pulling back the curtain on these temporal anomalies doesn't make the world any less magical. In fact, I'd say it shifts the magic to where it truly belongs. The paranormal isn't necessarily waiting for us out there in the dark woods or in some cursed valley. The true anomaly is the biological machine operating right inside our own skulls. The architecture of our own minds is way more fascinating than any geographical time warp could ever be. The human brain remains one of the greatest, most endlessly complex mysteries in the known universe. It's this organic supercomputer literally capable of bending the rules of time and space entirely within the confines of our own consciousness. How wild is that?
I want to leave you with this final, super provocative thought from our source material today. Perhaps the strangest mystery isn't where time disappears, but how we experience it in the first place. It really makes you wonder about the very nature of the present moment you're in right now, doesn't it? Like, is your brain rendering this exact second accurately? Thank you so much for joining me as we unpack the architecture of lost seconds.
If you love diving into this explainer today, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into mysteries, strange stories, and the entirely fascinating phenomena of the human mind. See you next time.